Marcus stared at his laptop screen, watching his bank account balance with growing anxiety. The numbers didn't lie. His graduate stipend barely covered half his rent, and surviving on ramen noodles was getting old fast. His one-bedroom apartment near the university was perfect for studying, with its quiet corner location and abundant natural light, but the cost was slowly drowning him. "You need to find a roommate, man," his friend Jake said over coffee at their usual cafe. "I know someone who might be interested. Her name's Tessa. She's a theater major. Seems really responsible. Want me to set something up?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. At this point, he'd consider anyone who could help split the bills and wouldn't throw parties every night. 3 days later, Tessa knocked on his door with a bright smile and an armload of references. She was shorter than he'd expected, with curly red hair and paint-stained fingers that suggested she was as artistic as Jake had mentioned. She looked around the apartment with obvious approval, testing the water pressure in the bathroom and commenting on the good cell phone reception. "This place is exactly what I've been looking for," she said, settling onto his couch. "I love how much space there is. It reminds me of the house I grew up in. It's room for everyone to spread out and be comfortable." They discussed the practical details. Rent split 50-50. Utilities shared, common areas kept clean. Tessa had steady income from her work-study job at the campus theater, plus financial support from her parents. She could pay her share on time, which was honestly Marcus's biggest concern. "I'm pretty easy to live with," Tessa assured him, tucking her legs under herself on the couch. "I don't make much noise, I clean up after myself, and I'm super laid back." About sharing space? "Growing up with 3 siblings taught me how to be flexible about these things." Marcus smiled, relieved. He was an only child who'd lived alone for 2 years, but he figured he could adapt. Maybe having someone more social around would even be good for him. His advisor was always telling grad students to maintain better work-life balance. "I think this could work really well," Marcus said, and they shook hands on it. Tessa moved in the following Saturday with surprising efficiency. She didn't have much furniture, just boxes of clothes, art supplies, and books. Marcus helped her carry everything up the stairs, noting how organized and clean her belongings were. This was definitely going to work out. The first week exceeded his expectations. Tessa kept her promise about cleanliness, washing her dishes promptly and keeping her art projects contained to her designated corner of the living room. She was friendly without being overwhelming, greeting him cheerfully when their paths crossed, but giving him space to study. Marcus found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't expected. Coming home to voices from the kitchen, Tessa humming while she cooked made the apartment feel more alive. She'd occasionally offer to share her dinner or ask about his research, showing genuine interest in his psychology studies. But by the second week, Marcus began noticing small things that made him slightly uncomfortable. Tessa would spread her theater scripts across the dining table and forget to clear them away, even when Marcus needed the space for his own work. She'd use his coffee maker without asking, not maliciously, but as if she'd simply assumed it was now communal property. When Marcus gently mentioned these things, Tessa seemed genuinely surprised. "Oh, I didn't realize that bothered you," she'd say with a confused expression. "In my family, we just shared everything automatically." It never occurred to me to ask permission for little stuff like that. Marcus told himself to be patient. They came from different backgrounds, and adjustment took time. These were minor issues that would work themselves out as they got used to living together. Besides, Tessa always apologized and seemed to make an effort to change when he brought something up, but deep down, a small voice was already whispering that maybe this wasn't going to be as simple as he'd hoped. The real problems started during Marcus's 3rd week of living with Tessa. He'd just returned from a particularly grueling day at the university library. Exhausted from wrestling with statistical analyses for his thesis, all he wanted was to change into comfortable clothes and grab a quiet dinner. He walked into his bedroom and had barely started unbuttoning his shirt when the door swung open without warning. "Hey Marcus, do you have a phone charger, Ikuto?" Tessa stopped mid-sentence, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she looked around his room casually, as if walking in on someone half-dressed was perfectly normal. Marcus froze, his shirt hanging open, completely mortified. "Tessa, could you maybe knock first?" he managed, quickly pulling his shirt closed. She tilted her head with genuine confusion. "Oh, sorry. I guess I should have. It's just that in my house growing up, we never really bothered with knocking. We were all family, you know? Privacy wasn't really a big thing." "Right, but this is different," Marcus said, feeling awkward about having to explain something so basic. "We're not family." "You're totally right. Sorry about that," Tessa said, already moving toward his desk to grab a charger. "Thanks for this, I'll bring it back later." And then she was gone, leaving Marcus standing there wondering what had just happened. Over the following days, Marcus tried to convince himself it was a one-time mistake. Tessa had apologized, after all, but then it happened again and again. She'd walk into his room looking for something she'd left there, or to ask a quick question, or sometimes just to chat about her day. Each time she seemed genuinely surprised when Marcus reminded her to knock first. "I keep forgetting," she'd say with an apologetic laugh. "Old habits, you know? My family was just so casual about stuff like this. The knocking issue was bad enough." But Marcus soon realized Tessa had a very relaxed attitude about clothing around the apartment. She'd walk from her bedroom to the bathroom wearing just a towel, or lounge in the living room wearing tiny shorts and a crop top that made Marcus feel like he should find somewhere else to look. When he finally worked up the courage to mention feeling uncomfortable, Tessa laughed it off. "You're so formal about everything, Marcus. It's just skin wear, all human here. I'm not walking around naked or anything." Marcus started to wonder if he was being unreasonable. Maybe he was too uptight, too used to living alone. But something about the situation felt fundamentally wrong to him, even if he couldn't articulate why. The final straw came on a Thursday morning when Marcus woke up to find Tessa in his room, going through his closet. "What are you doing?" he asked, still groggy with sleep. "Oh, hey, you're awake," she said brightly. "I spilled coffee on my shirt and I'm running late for rehearsal. Do you have something I could borrow?" She was standing there in her underwear, and a bra acting like this was a completely reasonable way to start the morning. Marcus pulled his blanket higher, feeling more uncomfortable than he'd ever felt in his own home. "Tessa, you can't just come into my room like this, especially when I'm sleeping." "Why not?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "It's not like I was trying to wake you up. I was being super quiet." Marcus realized they were speaking completely different languages when it came to appropriate behavior, because this is my private space, and I was asleep, and you were not dressed. Tessa rolled her eyes. "Marcus, we're adults. Bodies aren't shameful things. You're acting like I'm doing something scandalous when I'm just borrowing a shirt." That evening, Marcus called Jake. "How well do you actually know Tessa?" he asked. "Not super well. Why? Is everything okay?" After Marcus explained the situation, Jake was quiet for a long moment. "That does sound pretty weird, man. Most people understand basic boundaries about bedrooms and stuff. Maybe you guys need to have a serious talk." As Marcus hung up, he realized Jake was right. This wasn't going to resolve itself through hints and gentle corrections. But the thought of confronting Tessa directly made his stomach churn. Every time he'd tried to set limits, she made him feel like he was being unreasonable or prudish. Still, something had to change. Marcus couldn't continue feeling like a stranger in his own apartment, constantly worried about when Tessa might appear in his doorway or what state of undress she might be in. He decided to install a lock on his bedroom door just as a temporary measure while he figured out how to have that difficult conversation. Marcus installed the lock on his bedroom door during Tessa's theater rehearsal, feeling ridiculous but also relieved. When she came home and noticed the new hardware, she raised an eyebrow but didn't comment immediately. It wasn't until the next morning that she brought it up. "Really, Marcus? A lock?" she asked, touching the brass knob with obvious disapproval. "What's next? Security cameras in the hallway?" "I just value my privacy," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Whatever makes you feel better, I guess," Tessa said with a shrug that somehow managed to convey disappointment and judgment at the same time. For about a week, the lock seemed to solve the immediate problem. Marcus could change clothes and sleep without anxiety, and he began to think maybe they could coexist peacefully after all. But then Tessa found new ways to cross boundaries he didn't even know he had. It started with his belongings. Marcus came home from his research methods seminar to find Tessa curled up on the couch wearing his favorite sweater, a thick gray cardigan his grandmother had knitted for him. "Hope you don't mind I borrowed this," she said, without looking up from her script. "It was just sitting in the laundry room and I was freezing." The sweater hung loose on her smaller frame. Something about seeing someone else wear something so personal made Marcus's chest tight. "I would have preferred if you'd asked first." "Come on, it's just a sweater. I'll wash it before I give it back." But it wasn't just a sweater to Marcus, and by the next week, it was his coffee mug. Then his laptop charger. Then his good headphones. Tessa seemed to view everything in the apartment as communal property, regardless of who had actually bought it. "We're roommates," she'd say whenever Marcus brought it up. "Roommates share things. That's how this works." The situation reached a breaking point after Marcus spent an entire weekend psyching himself up for a serious conversation. He'd even written notes on his phone, trying to find the right words to explain his perspective without sounding accusatory. Monday evening seemed perfect. Tessa was home, relaxed, watching something on her laptop. Marcus took a deep breath and approached her. "Hey, Tessa, can we talk for a minute?" She paused her show and looked up with immediate wariness. "Sure, what's up?" "I wanted to discuss some roommate stuff, just to make sure we're on the same page about boundaries and personal space." The conversation went downhill from there. Guidelines. Tessa's voice got sharp when Marcus pulled out his phone with his notes. "You want to create rules for how I'm allowed to exist in my own home?" "It's not about rules," Marcus tried to explain. "It's about mutual respect. I respect your space and belongings, and I'd appreciate the same consideration." "When have I ever disrespected you?" Tessa demanded, and she sounded genuinely hurt. "I clean up after myself. I'm friendly. I try to be a good roommate." "Da. Now you're making me sound like some kind of terrible person just for being comfortable around you." Marcus felt like he was losing his grip on reality. "Tessa, you come into my room without permission constantly. You wear my clothes without asking. You treat my personal belongings like they belong to both of us. Those aren't disrespectful things," Tessa shot back, her voice rising. "Those are normal roommate things. Maybe the problem isn't my behavior. Maybe the problem is that you have completely unrealistic expectations about what living with someone means." "How is wanting basic privacy unrealistic?" Marcus asked, his frustration finally showing. "Normal for uptight people, maybe," Tessa said coldly. "I've had roommates before, Marcus. Never had anyone complain about me being too friendly or too comfortable in my own home." Marcus wondered what those previous roommates had really thought but had been too polite to say. "Look," he tried one more time, "this is both our home, but that doesn't mean we can't have any personal boundaries." "You know what boundaries do, Marcus?" Tessa stood up abruptly. "They create distance between people. They make relationships cold and formal. Is that really what you want our living situation to be like?" "I want to feel comfortable in my own apartment," Marcus said, his patience finally exhausted. "Well, I'm sorry I make you so uncomfortable just by existing in the same space as you," Tessa said with bitter sarcasm. "Maybe we're just not compatible as roommates." She grabbed her laptop and headed toward her room, then turned back. "Know what, Marcus? I was trying to be your friend. I thought we could be more than just two people who happen to split rent. But if you want to live like strangers, fine, we can do that." Her door slammed, leaving Marcus alone on the couch, feeling worse than before he'd started the conversation. True to her word, Tessa began treating Marcus like a polite stranger. She barely acknowledged him when their paths crossed, kept to her room most of the time, and when they did interact, she was coldly civil. But she didn't change any of the behaviors Marcus had asked her to address. If anything, she seemed to go out of her way to do exactly what he'd requested, she'd stop doing. She borrowed his coffee mug and left it dirty in the sink. She had friends over without warning and made no effort to keep the noise down. And despite their conversation about boundaries, she still didn't knock before trying to enter his room. She just rattled the locked handle and walked away. When it didn't open, the situation became unbearable the week Marcus had scheduled his most important meeting of the semester. Professor Williams, his thesis advisor, had agreed to a video call to discuss his research proposal, something Marcus had been preparing for months. He'd told Tessa about it in advance, explaining how crucial this meeting was for his academic future. Could you maybe keep things quiet during that time? He'd asked. It's only an hour, but I really need to focus. Tessa had nodded without really looking at him. Sure, whatever. 10 minutes into the call with Professor Williams, music started blasting from Tessa's room. Marcus tried to ignore it, but his advisor kept asking him to repeat himself because the background noise was so overwhelming. I'm sorry, Professor Williams, Marcus said, muting his microphone. Let me just handle this quickly. He knocked on Tessa's door, but there was no response over the pounding bass. He knocked harder, more urgently. What? Tessa finally yelled. Could you please turn the music down? I'm in the middle of that important call I told you about. There was a pause. Then, incredibly, the music got even louder. Marcus stood outside her door in complete shock. She was doing this on purpose. She was deliberately sabotaging his meeting because she was angry about their conversation. He returned to his computer where Professor Williams was waiting with obvious concern. I'm so sorry about this, Marcus said, his face burning with embarrassment. Could we possibly reschedule? Of course, Professor Williams said kindly. These things happen. But Marcus, you might want to address this situation before our next meeting. After ending the call, Marcus sat in his room feeling defeated and humiliated. This wasn't about different communication styles or family backgrounds anymore. Tessa was actively trying to harm his academic career because he'd asked for basic respect. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself walking on eggshells in his own home. Every sound from Tessa's room made him tense, wondering what boundary she'd cross next. He started spending entire days at the library, not because he needed to, but because being in the apartment had become unbearable. The final incident happened on a Friday evening when Marcus was trying to catch up on reading. He'd missed due to all the stress. He was in his room with the door locked, highlighting passages in a textbook, when he heard familiar voices in the hallway outside his door. This is Marcus's room, he heard Tessa saying to someone. He's probably in there studying. He literally never does anything else. Then, to his horror, he heard her trying his door handle. It's locked, she announced, with obvious amusement. He's completely paranoid about privacy. It's honestly kind of pathetic. Marcus heard multiple people laughing, and his face burned with humiliation. Tessa was mocking him to her friends, making him sound like some kind of antisocial freak just because he wanted basic privacy in his own bedroom. It's all weird when I wear normal clothes around the apartment, Tessa continued, her voice carrying clearly through the door. Like, sorry for being a human being who gets warm sometimes. B has a crush on you and can't handle it, one of her friends suggested. And they all laughed again. Marcus wanted to bang on the door and tell them they were wrong, that this had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with respect. But he knew that would only make things worse, confirming Tessa's narrative that he was somehow unstable or inappropriate, as he listened to them move into the living room. Still, talking and laughing loudly, Marcus realized something had to change. He couldn't continue living this way, constantly anxious and defensive in his own home. But he also couldn't afford to move. He'd signed a year-long lease. For the first time since this whole situation began, Marcus started researching his options. Maybe there were resources at the university for students dealing with difficult roommate situations. Maybe his landlord could help mediate. Maybe there was some way to resolve this that didn't involve him sacrificing his education or his mental health. One thing was certain. He couldn't keep hoping Tessa would spontaneously develop respect for boundaries. If anything was going to change, he was going to have to make it happen. Marcus spent the weekend at his sister Claire's apartment, trying to clear his head and figure out his next move. Claire listened to the whole story with growing concern, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. Marcus, this isn't about you. Being uptight, she said firmly. This person is deliberately making your life miserable because you asked for basic respect. That's not normal roommate behavior. That's harassment. But maybe I should have tried harder to understand her perspective, Marcus said, still second-guessing himself. Understanding someone's background doesn't mean accepting behavior that makes you miserable, Claire replied. You need to document everything and talk to your landlord. Back at the apartment Sunday evening, Marcus started keeping a written record of incidents, dates, times, witnesses. When Tessa borrowed his things without asking, he wrote it down. When she had loud friends over at midnight on a school night, he documented it. When she made comments about his paranoia loud enough for him to hear, he noted that too. By Wednesday, he had enough material to make his case. He called Mr. Peterson, their landlord, and explained the situation as objectively as possible. "I see," Mr. Peterson said after Marcus finished. "This does sound like it's gone beyond normal roommate adjustment issues. I'd like to arrange a meeting with both of you to discuss this situation." The meeting took place the following Saturday in Mr. Peterson's office. Tessa arrived looking defensive, probably assuming Marcus had called to complain about her. Marcus brought his documentation but tried to present everything as fairly as possible. "I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble," Marcus began. "I just want us to find a way to live together that works for both of us." Mr. Peterson let each of them explain their perspective without interruption. When it was Tessa's turn, she painted. Marcus is antisocial and unreasonable, someone who wanted to control how she lived in her own home. But Tessa, Mr. Peterson said gently, entering someone's bedroom without permission, especially when they've repeatedly asked you not to, that's not about being social or friendly. That's a violation of privacy that could actually get you in legal trouble. For the first time since Marcus had known her, Tessa looked genuinely uncomfortable. Mr. Peterson continued, "And borrowing someone's personal belongings without asking isn't sharing, it's taking. Even roommates need to respect each other's property." "I never meant any harm," Tessa said quietly. "I believe that," Mr. Peterson replied. "But intent doesn't erase impact." Marcus has been trying to communicate his boundaries clearly, and those requests aren't unreasonable. They spent the next hour working out a formal roommate agreement with specific guidelines, knocking and waiting for permission before entering bedrooms, asking before borrowing personal items, giving 24-hour notice for overnight guests, and keeping noise levels respectful during study hours. Most importantly, Mr. Peterson made it clear that violations of the agreement could result in lease termination for the offending party. "This isn't about being unfriendly," he explained to Tessa. "It's about being respectful adults who happen to share living space." The change wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. Tessa actually started knocking on Marcus's door and waiting for a response. She asked before using his kitchen supplies. She gave him heads up when friends were coming over. Their relationship remained distant. They were polite housemates rather than friends, but Marcus found he could breathe again. In his own home, he could focus on his studies without constant anxiety about boundary violations. 3 months later, during finals week, Tessa approached him in the kitchen. "Marcus, I wanted to apologize," she said awkwardly. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realized I made you really uncomfortable. That wasn't fair, even if I didn't understand why at the time." "Thank you," Marcus said, genuinely surprised. "That means a lot." "I still think you're more formal than I'm used to," she added with a small smile. "But that doesn't make you wrong. Different people need different things." It wasn't friendship, but it was understanding. And for Marcus, that was enough to make their shared space feel like home again.